You mentioned I'm joined now by crossbench Senator David Leyonhjelm. Welcome to the program.
Liberal Democrat Senator, please.
Sorry, I should be giving you the free advertising, shouldn't I? All right, let's talk. I want to talk to you about your budget plan, which you wrote about today in the Australian Financial Review. But as a precursor to that, can I just ask you about this childcare plan that the government have put in place as some sort of trial? $250 million is what the trial is going to cost, but that's going to be a drop in the ocean, presumably, compared to what it would cost to roll it out writ large. What's your view?
I had a briefing with Minister Scott Morrison a couple of weeks ago on this. He hasn't announced all these details, so I think it would probably be unfair of me to go into...
You must have a gut feel about this kind of spending initiative.
Yes, I'm not happy with increasing spending on childcare so long as it remains so heavily regulated. The National Quality Framework, for example, prescribes that you can only run a childcare centre if you've got half your staff with degrees or diplomas, the other half with certificates. You've got to have a degree, qualified person per number of kids.
Labor, of course, brought a lot of this in over its 6 years in power. They were very proud of it, but it upped costs, it made it more difficult. Those concern you? Those
sort of things. And I raised those concerns with Mr Morrison, and he said, well, they're basically state issues. But I don't agree with him. The National Quality Framework is a federal thing. Funding is contingent on complying with the National Quality Framework. I think the Commonwealth could do a lot to deregulate childcare and lower the costs. Now, if they lower the costs via deregulation, then there's no need to bump up expenditure because it then becomes more affordable without the subsidies.
OK, your budget plan, you say we can get back to surplus almost immediately.
Yes.
How do we do that?
This is a little unusual. It's not the ideal way to balance a budget, but we have a large amount of expenditure in the appropriations bill, $140 billion normally in the appropriations bill. Now, the appropriations bills won't be blocked by Labor.
By convention?
By convention. Ever since Malcolm Fraser blocked the appropriations bill of the Whitlam government, Labor has said, in fact both sides I think basically say no, we won't ever do that again. Now that $140 billion of expenditure in the appropriations bill under, in our view, could be cut by $30 billion to bring the budget back into balance.
So take me through some of the examples of that. What are the sorts of areas that you could cut? I know that you've got the details in front of you.
Yeah, I have. So there's foreign aid, $4.7 billion. Various Commonwealth healthcare programs, $4.4 billion. Healthy life...
Can I just stop you as we go through it? So foreign aid, haven't the government already been slicing into foreign aid a little bit?
Yes, they're winding it back, and I think that quite right too. But there's a lot more there. There's $4.7 billion in the budget. Our view, my party's view, is that foreign aid is basically donations from poor people in rich countries to rich people in poor countries. Now, the only exception to that is humanitarian type relief.
And presumably that's the part you would quarantine?
Yes, we have no quarrel with that. So Nepal's situation, for example.
What about the soft diplomacy argument that it's a useful tool?
Well, a lot of that aid goes to Indonesia. Look what it's done us. Look what good it's done us. Frankly, I don't think it does a whole lot for us in soft diplomacy areas.
OK, so what else did you have, sorry?
Assistance to industry, agriculture and exporters, $3.9 billion. Sports subsidies, including ASADA, wonderful organisation there, $3 billion. Various research, government-funded research. The scientists all love it. They scream at me every time I talk about cutting it back, and yet they crowd out the private sector. And the private sector does far more targeted research.
OK, but again, let me jump in on you. You have to know that the government's not going to touch that after some of the flack that they copped about initially not having a science minister, some of the criticisms around higher education funding and so forth. So whether your ideas have merit or not, you can't be hopeful that the government's going to jump on it.
I acknowledge there's a political issue, but there's political issues no matter what you do. If the government wants to legislate, for example, to reduce eligibility for pensions, it's going to require a bill to go through the Senate. Good luck with that. I mean, they'll have my vote. I think that's fine. But getting 6 crossbench votes, get it through the Senate, it will be quite a challenge. Whereas cutting $30 billion out of the appropriations bill, now suppose they don't want to do it on something that's politically sensitive like research. Perhaps they can find somewhere else to do it. I don't mind, as long as they do it.
It's a hell of a haircut, though, isn't it? Going from 140 billion to 110 billion.
Yes.
Yes. Have you spoken to any of the members of the finance team about these ideas?
To the ministry?
Yeah, to the no. Matthias Cormann, Josh Frydenberg, maybe even the Treasurer?
No. My objective is to basically set up as an example, okay, we're a Libertarian party. We think balanced budgets are absolute obligation of the government. There really is no excuse, no weasel words, nothing that should get them off the hook for not going for a balanced budget. And all I'm trying to do is say you can do it. This is one way you can do it. I did an alternative budget this time last year and said this is how we can return to surplus.
Let me ask you this on the way through on that. What about the retort that comes from Treasury as a department, or I think also from the Reserve Bank? Glenn Stevens, the Governor, I think has said this as well, which is that such a handbrake on the economy is too hard at this particular financial time. And then you've got Joe Hockey saying that you have different levers if you do that. If they're moving interest rates down and we're cutting too hard, you're putting your foot on the accelerator and the brake at the same time. What's your reaction?
The effect is temporary. If you cut government expenditure, it's temporary. The private sector moves in to fill up the space quite quickly, and of course, when you do that, get the government to pull out of a space and the private sector moves in, it generates more activity, generates more tax revenue. The government collects more revenue. It cancels itself out in a very short period of time. And of course, the other thing is that if you stop spending money or reduce the amount of money you're spending, you can reduce taxes. And that's also good for government revenue.
Well, they're doing the opposite of that at the moment. I think Peter Costello would agree with you on that one. I've got to change tack before we run out of time and ask you about your private member's bill around the issue of gay marriage. We've seen the whole issue gaining much more coverage lately. Tanya Plibersek has come out and she's seeking a binding vote for the Labor Party. The Liberal Party are going to have to decide whether or not they allow a conscience vote rather than a binding vote against gay marriage. How do you see this debate unfolding with some of those discussions in the mix?
Well, I would hope the Labor Party will stick with the conscience vote approach, or free vote, I think is the technical term for it. That makes it more compelling for the Liberals to do the same thing. If the Labor Party moves to a binding vote, then there's space, if you like, in the political arena for a major party to say, well, we're not going to allow a binding vote, we're going to a free vote, we're going to stick with a binding vote.
Because it's a distorted vote at any rate.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, that's right.
So you think Tanya Plibersek is doing her case, if she's pro, which she said she is, gay marriage, she wants a binding vote, by seeking a binding vote, is it your view that she's doing more harm than good to her ultimate cause, which is to achieve an outcome of gay marriage?
Time will tell, but my instinct is I think it would be unwise to pursue this. I think it would be better if we said this is a conscience issue for everyone. Yes, it's not as bad, or it's not as profound, if you like, as euthanasia is, and those other things where a conscience vote is generally agreed to be the only way to go. But it is a very big issue for a lot of people. I get lots and lots of letters and emails and so on from same-sex couples who want to get married. And so, a very profound issue for them. There are people in the Labor Party who are passionately in support of it, and there are others who are passionately against it.
I don't support you compelling people to vote for it in a party vote, though, particularly not a party that says it'll expel you if you cross the floor. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. I would like to see it treated as a conscience vote by all members of Parliament, everybody. And at the end of the day, that's the Libertarian approach. That's the philosophy of my party. You don't have to approve of same-sex marriage. You don't have to endorse it or recommend it or anything like that. All you have to do is tolerate it. That's as much as what I'm asking anybody to do.
OK, before I run out of time, let me then ask you this. My assumption is that Tanya Plibersek won't win on this one internally. Bill Shorten may well intervene and ensure it stays as a conscience vote. If that happens, on that assumption, let's look at the Liberal Party. Tony Abbott has talked about allowing a discussion in the party room around a conscience vote. There's some conjecture actually around how that might transpire or when exactly. But firstly, is it your view, yes or no if you don't mind, is it your view that the Liberal Party will or won't, if the party room discusses this issue, allow a conscience vote?
Well, prior to Tanya Plibersek saying she wanted to seek a binding vote.
But assuming she fails on that, and then the coalition, or the Liberal Party, I should say, look at it.
I'm not so sure that you can just assume that will wind the clock back. I rather think the genie's out of the bottle on this issue, And there will be people within the Liberal Party room who'll say, well, you know, there is this movement within Labor to make it a binding vote. Maybe it's safer for us to stick with a binding vote against.
Do you think that may now happen even if Tanya Plibersek is unsuccessful?
I am concerned about that. But if I was to go back to prior to her saying that she was going to seek a binding vote, I'm quite confident we would get a conscience vote decision, a free vote decision by the Liberal Party room before the end of the year. I was quite confident about that.
All right, Senator Leyonhjelm, appreciate your time on the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break here on